Right, morning everyone. I'm Rob Kern, Chief Exec of Southampton Voluntary Services. Welcome to our first hybrid Friday forum. Hopefully the tech is going to work seamlessly. Big thanks to our tech partners, Drop the Mask, that have made this possible this morning. And also thanks to Sam Gould, our development worker, who's done most of the organising for today. So a couple of bits about how this will run. Firstly, if you have a question, if you can, for those that are online, if you have a question, if you can put it in the chat, and then what we'll do is when we move on to questions, we'll go through them kind of one by one and get the answers for you. And I think that's probably about it, but welcome to everybody in the room. And I've been waiting to say this, and welcome to our viewers at home. Fantastic. Right, so we're looking at funding today, and our first speaker is Jackie Scott, who's Chief Exec of Hampshire and Isle of Wight Community Foundation. So Jackie, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks everyone at Drop the Mask. I'm going to stand here. I think that should do the trick. So I'm Jackie Scott. I'm Chief Exec of Hampshire and Isle of Wight Community Foundation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Community Foundation as a whole, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we work and what you would expect if you were applying for funding from us. And then the bit that I know you're really all waiting for, I'm going to let you know about some funding that's coming up. And then I've got loads of slides at the end that I'm not going to go through, but I know SVS can send out, which just gives you a few tips, things that you can kind of have in your back pocket if you are at the point where you're going to apply for funding from us. So on the next slide, you'll see we're just talking a little bit about who we are. So we're part of a network of community foundations. So literally every inch of the country is covered by a community foundation. And there's a few international ones that are linked into our network as well. So the thing that makes us all similar is that we all have geography as being kind of the first thing that you need to think about when you're thinking about a community foundation. So for us, it's in the name, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. When we say Hampshire, we always mean Southampton and Portsmouth as well, unless we say otherwise. But the other thing that brings a network of community foundations together is that we're always focused on smaller, less well-known nonprofits, and particularly ones that are that are smaller turnover and so on. We are our own independent charity. So even though we work in this network, we are our own independent charity. And our focus, you'll hear me talk about this a little bit more, but our focus is always on poverty and disadvantage. And in the last few years, and we would hope this year will be similar, we've donated around £2 million annually into the sector throughout Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, including Southampton and Portsmouth. So it really helps to understand where our money comes from when you're working with us, because otherwise we look really eclectic. Understanding where our money comes from helps you to understand why we look eclectic. It doesn't stop us being eclectic, but it does help you understand. So there's essentially two different things that we have in terms of the money that we're releasing into the community. One is an endowment fund. So we've got about 15 million quid. We invest it. It's managed by professional investment houses. That money has come largely from wealthy individuals throughout the county and the island, some businesses, and some what are described as trust transfers. You don't really need to worry about those. If a grant-making trust or a small trust has effectively become inactive, community foundations are the place that they go to release their funding so that that money can get working in the community again. Don't need to worry about that. So that endowment fund, around 15 million quid, usually releases about £500,000 worth of funding every year. So if anybody has been applying for grants from us recently, you would have seen at the beginning of the year a fund called Including Communities. And it was quite a general fund. It covered all of Hampshire, including the unitaries and the Isle of Wight, quite a broad fund, kind of looking at supporting people throughout the county who are living in poverty or experiencing disadvantage. That comes from the endowment fund, but then the rest of the money that we are able to disperse throughout the community comes from a whole range of different funders. And that means that we don't have total control over how that money gets spent. So a good example is some funding we did at the beginning of the year for cost of living grants, small grants for organisations to support people through the cost of living crisis in different ways. So we had funding from DCMS. If anybody's handled government funding, you'll know that that's very restrictive. We had funding from the Masonic Foundation. Again, that was very restrictive. It was only for very specific work. And so because we're doing that all the time, because we're handling other people's money all the time, we have loads of different funds that get advertised on our website for groups to apply to, and they all have really different criteria. And from our point of view, we recognize that as community groups, makes it quite hard for you to know whether or not you're going to be eligible for funding from us. So I will talk a little bit more about that shortly so that you can see what the kind of broad eligibility requirements are. So just to give you a bit of a picture, we, like most charitable organisations, we've got all the stuff that you would imagine we would have. We've got a finance person, we've got a comms person and so on. But the people that you're most likely to work with if you're applying to us for funding is Joanne, who is our grants manager, Catherine, who's our grants administrator, and myself. Now, all of our team, except for myself, are part-time. So I'm the only person who's in the office 5 days a week for a full working day. So I would always say, just bear that in mind. Joanne, for example, is 4 days a week. Catherine's 4 days a week across 5 days. So just bear that in mind that we are kind of quite a part-time team. So I talked a little bit about our kind of priorities for funding. And when we are handling other people's money as well, when we're talking to them about what that funding might achieve, we're discussing these sorts of priorities with them. So generally speaking, this is where, if this is kind of generally what you're doing, you'll find that there is funding that is likely to be, that you're likely to be eligible for. So geography really matters. So for us, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, including the unitaries, but sometimes that geography can be very narrow. So sometimes it's as narrow as Binstead Village. Sometimes it's Southampton, sometimes it's everywhere. So it can be quite narrow geography depending on the funding and what its specific priorities are. We're always focused on the poorest and most disadvantaged people. So that's the one theme, it's the golden thread that goes through everything else. When we are delivering funding into the community, the expectation, the core requirement is that it's reaching the poorest and most disadvantaged people. But we're not really, I'm not sure what the word is, but we want you to make that argument to us. So the community that you work with, you argue to us about what makes them poor, disadvantaged, you know, facing inequality and so on. So we're not really deterministic about what that might mean, but we want you to make that argument to us. I mentioned that we tend to work with smaller, less well-known organisations. So generally speaking, organisations turning over less than £1 million a year are the sorts of organisations that we're likely to fund. But that's just a working kind of figure. It can change depending on the origin of the funding. And increasingly, we want to see work that has the target community. So your beneficiary group, your clients, whatever words you use to describe the people you work with, we want to see how they're involved in design and delivery of the work. Now, we also recognize how difficult that is. So we deliberately don't say for and by, because that can be really difficult to achieve, particularly if you're an older organization that's been working in a particular way for a long time. But we do expect to see your target communities to be involved in design and delivery. There's a specific question about that on our application form. So you need to be able to explain what you do to bring that community along with you. Just a flag, it's helpful for you to know before you even go onto our website what we don't fund. So as a rule, we don't fund capital. I did a presentation up in Winchester with a churches group with about 50 different churches in the room. And as soon as I told them we don't fund capital, they all sort of fell asleep. So I'm sure it wasn't me. But normally capital isn't covered. And the reason for that is that capital is expensive. It's difficult, it's specialized. So we tend to avoid capital. And we tend to give quite small grants, so usually less than £5,000. And most capital of any significance is going to be more expensive than that. You know, roofs, even things like boilers or improvements to bathrooms can be really expensive. So we tend not to fund that. We're secular, and so there is a requirement that organizations have to confirm that they're not proselytizing a particular religion or religious standpoint. But there's always a little bit of grey in that. So if you were a religious organization working with a particular religious group, there may be good justifiable reasons for you to say that you're working specifically with that group. Just explain that to us so we understand it. I mentioned the general figure for turnover, and there are more restrictions. As anybody who has applied for funding before will know, there's always loads of restrictions on the sorts of organizations that can apply, and that's all detailed on our website, so you can have a look there. So just to give you a bit of an overview on what the sorts of things that we're interested in funding and where our kind of priorities lie, in as much as we have control over it. But this links to what we do when we go out to find money to use for funding in the community as well, because we go out to find money based on these priorities. It's not always the money that ends up with us, but it's what we're doing when we're actively out there looking for money. So the golden thread is poverty and inequality. And there's all sorts of groups of people that, you know, could describe themselves as being poor or facing inequality. And we want you to explain that to us when you're applying. But that's the golden thread. You might apply for funding under a different theme, but we would still expect you to address the questions about poverty and inequality. So that's really the driving factor for everything. But the other areas that you're most likely to find that there's funding available from us are these 5, and it's the first 3 where the bulk of our funding goes. So poverty and inequality is a bucket of its own. It's the golden thread that runs through everything else. But where we fund most significantly is under employability. So activities that enable people to move closer to the workforce. So that doesn't necessarily mean work that gets people into jobs, but work that helps break down barriers for accessing employment, particularly for people who are particularly disadvantaged in accessing work. Flourishing communities is the broadest theme, and that's all about the kind of thing that enables communities to flourish. So it can be beyond just food banks and that sort of thing, to what is it that makes a community or a community of interest something that people want to belong to. And then the final one is, or the final sort of priority area is health and well-being. And again, that can cover lots of things. So it can cover something like organizations working with people who are diabetic and ensuring that they are learning about good dietary practice and exercise and that sort of thing. Lots of work around mental health under this. But it can also be not so much those direct interventions, but prevention work as well. And linked with health and well-being is always that kind of sense that getting people together, getting people out, doing things is a way of building social capital as well. So here's the bit that brings you all down to earth. So the stuff that you really need to know about us. We're almost always heavily oversubscribed for funding. So I mentioned a moment ago a fund that we had earlier this year called Including Communities. We funded about £180,000 out of that pot. I think first tranche of applications was about £700,000 worth of work. So that's kind of a 6 times oversubscribed. Now, that's not to say don't apply, but what I would say is that it does mean apply when you feel you are really meeting the criteria. Don't apply if you don't think you meet the criteria. We are increasingly strict about our due diligence requirements. This is a standard requirements that we will ask for anybody applying for funding from us. Your latest financial accounts, your constitution, your safeguarding policy, your equalities, poverty, however you name it, a bank statement, and a list of your board members or management committee. And I'm just going to say a couple of things about some of those items. So community groups are constituted in all sorts of different ways, and that's fine. We can fund any charitable structure. But if you're a CIC or something like that, you have to have 3 unrelated directors, right? So, and that's a fraud prevention, because if you have people who are all family members and they're all signing the checks, you know, that's not really robust financial management. So things like that are really important. And if you're not sure about that, talk to us about it. Safeguarding policies, we will turn you down at the start. You won't get shortlisted if A, you don't have a safeguarding policy, or B, if you have an inadequate safeguarding policy. And the sorts of things we see there is safeguarding policies that don't name the organization, safeguarding policies that are undated, safeguarding policies that still have insert details here because it's been downloaded from the web, or safeguarding policies that don't have a named safeguarding lead. So that kind of who still works at the organization, and we will check that. So we will not let any flexibility on safeguarding. We have a fund recently for sports activities, and we have already turned down half of the applicants on safeguarding. So we won't allow any leeway on that. Equalities, again, that's just what's appropriate for your organization, but it does need to cover the activities that your organization does. And bank statements, and it may seem obvious, but you would be surprised at how many we decline because they don't have a suitable bank account. Bank statement has to be in the name of the group, and you have to confirm that more than 2 people sign or have authority to sign payments from that bank account. We do still receive bank accounts which are in individuals' names, and we won't pay money into those. And just to let you know, it normally takes around 3 months from beginning to end when you're applying for funding, for open funding from us. So you make your application day 1, and around about 3 months later, you'll have your final decision. And I'll just explain a little bit about the process. So we normally have, for open funding, which is the bulk of our funding, it will be advertised online. You must apply online. If that's a problem, talk to us, but the application has to come into us online. And there's normally a month. So we'll be advertising it, telling you all about what the criteria are, and you've got a month to complete what your idea for that funding would be. And then if you're shortlisted, you'll go into an assessment process with an external assessor, and that will usually be 6 weeks or so. And then the final decision for us for open funding is always made by a panel that's not staff. So we have arm's length decision making. So you might have had lots of chats with 1 or 2 of us during the term of your applying and assessment. And we might be completely convinced, and we may love your application, but it doesn't guarantee you'll get funded because the final decision is made arm's length by one of our panels. And our panels mainly are our trustees or a mix of trustees and other external experts. We always try and make you aware of the decision as quickly as possible. So we try and get those decisions out within a week of the panel usually. If you are successful, you always have to report back to us. So this is a bit that you're all here for, right? Where's the money? Where's the money? So we've got 2 funds coming up that we know will arrive, and there's always possibility that there'll be more or others. Now, Money Barn, does anybody in the room know Money Barn? So Money Barn are they're part of what was the Provident and is now called Vanquis. So they're a local corporate, they're based in Petersfield, and they're very interested because they're a vehicle lender. Money Barn itself is a vehicle lender, so they will give loans out to people who wouldn't otherwise get high street banking loans and that sort of thing. And so they're very interested in social and financial inclusion. And they're interested in young people 25 and under, age 25 and under. And this is newly covering Southampton. So last year was the first time that they opened the geography out as far as Southampton. So if you are working on social and financial inclusion for young people, this is a great fund. They're a great funder. They're really good to work with. And then Ford is a separate endowment fund that we hold from back in the day when Ford were one of the biggest employers here, back in the good old days. And that's restricted to work in Eastleigh and Southampton. And that again is with young people, and the emphasis on the fund is on employability skills. But skills in this case is quite broadly defined. And so that can be soft skills and, work with behavior and that sort of thing, as well as technical skills. So if you had some interesting stuff that you were doing on, I don't know, learning how to build a boat, we're in Southampton, that's the kind of interesting stuff that Ford would love to see. They're particularly interested for those hard technical skills. They're particularly interested in STEM type of skills. So loads more information available about us and about the grants that are coming up. I would really recommend you sign up to our grants newsletter, because that's the first way you'll know if grants are available. But do keep an eye out on the website. We know that our emails can disappear into inboxes and spam and that sort of thing. Everything that's an open funding round will always be available on the website. So do keep a look on that. I would also really recommend, if you're not bored to death by me today, do join our webinars. We do a webinar for every fund. It's not always me presenting them, but we do a webinar for every fund to give you a bit more of a picture, a bit more depth about what that fund is all about and what we're looking for. And if you are thinking about it, that hour of your time investment is really worth it, because that may mean that you say it's not for us, and you've just saved yourself 4 hours of having to fill in your application form. So I do really recommend that you look at the webinars when there's open funds out there. And then there's loads more information, FAQs and so on. Now, we'll send out the rest of the slides, but there's loads of slides that talk about how our application works practically, application process works practically, and some hints and tips for the sorts of things you need to be thinking about and how you structure budgets and that sort of thing. But I'll leave that for everybody to go through in their own time. And I shall open for questions. I'm going to have some cold tea. Anybody has questions? I'll go Nina second. Sorry. Oh, I need to hand the mic. Yeah. There you go. Sorry, so the people at home.
Hello, thank you very much. Can I just ask, there was a mention of funding social action in one of the streams. Can you tell us a bit more about that? What that actually looks like?
So I hope everybody heard, but that was a question about what social action looks like. And I'm going to throw it back at you. So we try not to be overly deterministic about what activities we want you to do, because we want your activities to be driven by your community and what's right for them. There's always social action is always tricky for charities. So we have to be careful that it doesn't involve capital P politics, and that any kind of campaigning work and that sort of thing is within the rules as are understood for charitable funding, because we can't fund political activity. We did run last year, #IWill, if anybody's heard of that, which is youth social action. And that was very localized. So I'm just trying to think of some of the things we did fund. One application was around a local youth centre that was falling into disrepair, and doing a project with the local young people to ask them what they wanted with that youth centre. Did they want a youth centre? How would they like it used? And that sort of thing. So very localized. So you would generally find for social action type of activities, we would probably see quite localized stuff and probably quite strongly community of interest stuff. So yeah, but we would want it driven by you. And if you were applying to us for something like that, the theme would be flourishing communities, and the most likely fund for you would be what we call including communities. That's not going to be live again until next year. Nina.
Yeah, just about the Ford Community Fund. I know in the past they've we've been successful anyway, 13 to 16-year-olds. Do they prefer 13 to 16, or are they happy enough with 16 to 25?
Really good question, Nina. I actually can't remember. I'd have to check it out. That criteria will be online within a couple of weeks. So you'll see, and we'll be really careful about that. One of the things we've been working on recently is to try to provide our criteria in a much more digestible way. So things like that will be much more explicit. From my recollection, but I'm not going to sign anything in my blood on this one. From my recollection, the age group goes up to 25, but they would prefer to see that kind of mid-teenage years, the pre-A levels, I think, is what they're most interested in. That's my recollection. Yeah. 1 and 2.
Thank you. Can I just ask, so the criteria is around organizations that are less than £1 million turnover. How does that work with partnership working? So I know there's a whole host of opportunities now around partnership working in smaller and larger organizations working together. If a bid was to go in, and naturally as a larger organization, we would probably do the donkey work to get that across the line. Would that exclude the application because it's a partnership? So it's Saints Foundation. So would that exclude the application going in if we did it as a partnership point, or?
So the questions around partnership working and how best to handle that. So it's quite an interesting one for us, because we don't insist on partnership working, but we do ask you about partnership working. And I think it would depend on the originating fund, because sometimes that £1 million turnover wouldn't be a problem. And then I would always advise for the strongest organization, which generally, I mean, infrastructure strength like yours, should be the ones who actually take responsibility for the application, because that's the bit that, so if it is a partnership application, we need to understand how that partnership is working. But from our point of view as a funder, one of the things that we really care about is the organization able to manage the funding? So as a rule, we don't insist on partnership working, but we like to see it. And the bit that absolutely could not be minuted if we were in a minuting meeting is whoever's the most eligible partner should be the one that applies.
But does that still exclude us?
Well, we already have a funding partnership with you. But the thing about this £1 million, that is it's not a rigid rule. It will be for some funds, but for other funds, it's completely irrelevant, right? So we've got a fund which is New Forest focused, so it's geographically limited to New Forest. You could be a £20 million organisation and still apply to that fund. But by and large, we would be funding that under £1 million thing. I mean, for you, I would always say give us a shout, because, you know, one of our key interests is employability, and that's where we've been working with you on. And so there is a lot to be said about the right partnership, irrespective of kind of rules of funding. But we would be thinking, if we were setting up a fund, we would be thinking about that as well with something like that, if that makes sense.
Do you want to take the one on the... Well, no, go on. You go.
Thank you. I'm Dave Shields. I'm a local councillor. I'm currently the Sheriff of Southampton, which means next year I'll become the Lord Mayor, and we will be expecting. Well, whatever. Yeah, first citizen. I prefer to be, but anyway. But they an expectation there is they'll have some mayors' charities and things like that. So I'm still currently mulling around how to do that. But it's actually following on from the previous questions. There are several funding sources there. Sometimes it gets very complicated, and sometimes I just wondered to what extent you will collaborate with other funding providers for specific programs in order to make it less complicated. And the kind of the themes, I noticed that you've got your big themes there, but on the right hand side there was about environment and community safety, which are areas that I think do need to get more support for, and my mind is towards that. And I just wondered to what extent, for example, do you have collaboration with the Office of the Police and Crime Commission for any, because they often give out community grants. Sometimes it's quite a competitive process and it's duplicative, and I just wonder whether you work with groups like that and or others.
Yeah, yeah. It's a really good question about the sorts of relationships we have with other funding bodies. So I think that the first part of the question is answered by the fact that we don't always have control over that money, right? Because it depends on the origin of the funding. So we talk to other funders. So we have a good relationship with Donna Jones, for example. I mean, you know, Lucy at the National Lottery. If I have to, I'll talk to Lucy. You know, so we have a good relationship, and you'll see, I think, that as you look across a range of funders who are the sorts of funders that smaller community groups would be going to, that we're on the same page in terms of what we're doing. So what National Lottery are asking for a community group to provide in terms of their due diligence is very similar. Any funder will, you know. And my argument is always, if you can't get funding from us, if you're ineligible, completely ineligible to get funding from us, you're not going to get it from National Lottery or OPCC, for example. But, you know, when you look at those two things on the right-hand side of that chart, crime and safety and environment, the reason they're smaller, I mean, we're really keen on funding more into that, but the reason they're smaller is because OPCC has crime and safety wrapped up. They used to fund through us, but they don't now. And we don't have anybody who comes to us saying, I've got money for environmental funding, and we don't have any ring fence money for environmental funding, much as we'd love it. That might change over the next few years. It's pretty necessary, but there are also other funders out there who are doing that. And where it's really, really kind of about greening, that's quite specialized. You know, we're not in a position, as a generalist funder, we're not in a position to say that the most green thing you can do is put solar panels on your roof or to do something with your water supply. We don't know that. So that's where specialist funders are better. But one of the things that we're quite keen on the environmental strand is actually supporting organizations to deliver their work more greenly, if that's an adjective or a verb, but to be able to do that. And so we'd like to be able to have a pot of money to enable that, irrespective of.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, hand your mic back.
Yes, one of the sort of project areas I think things like community energy, where that's from bottom up, which strikes me that needs a bit of support and help, but quite probably labour intensive to start with. But actually, and it's not always obvious where there's funding from the bodies that do top down funding will do that. So that's the sort of area I was thinking about.
Yeah,
or one of them.
I totally understand that, and I'm looking at Rob, and I know there's an organisation here whose name is just not being pulled from the back of my mind, who is working on that kind of thing, and that they would be the go-to for advice about that. And I'm no expert in that kind of funding either, so I don't know who's there. And just so that you know, I mean, we do have good relationships with all the other funders, but sometimes we don't know either. And I would always direct you to SVS, or if you're in another geographic area, to your other CVSs to help on that.
Quick question for me. How are we doing in Southampton in terms of getting our fair share of the pie in terms of sort of, pound per head of population?
You're right. Actually, I don't have a slide for that, but when you do look at our funding every year, there's always three areas that take the bulk of the funding: Southampton, Portsmouth, and the island. And the reason's obvious. However you look at poverty and inequality, those three areas in this region are always going to be the key areas. We look a bit odd at the moment because we have a lot of money that's dedicated to the New Forest. There's a lot more poverty and inequality in the New Forest than what you might imagine. And so that's, at the moment, for the next probably 5 years, that will be the fourth one. And it varies between those three, Portsmouth, Southampton, and the island. Those three are usually looking at kind of somewhere between 16 to 22% of the funding each. And it goes a bit up and down like that. Portsmouth is different because we have funding from Portsmouth City Council from years ago that is endowment funding, so there's a ring-fenced pot. We don't have that for Southampton. The only ring-fenced pot we always have for Southampton, because it's endowment funding, is Ford. So I would love to talk to Southampton City Council about ways of enabling more funding into Southampton. I'll leave you mine.
One last question for me, and then we'll take the online questions. So
Sorry.
We're fine on time, I
Okay,
think.
Good, thanks.
So you've got a £15 million endowment.
Mm.
What do you have in place in terms of kind of ethical investment policy?
So we have, interestingly enough, I had a conversation with my treasurer about that yesterday. So our policy is to, because it's a difficult balance, right? We've got to make as much money as we can. That's an obligation from our investments. And we also don't want to act irresponsibly. So we have two fund managers. One is an organization called CCLA. Anybody who has large investments would know CCLA. They're a specialist charity funder. We're tied to them because of some match funding from the government from some years ago. Their ESG is probably broader. So as I would confidently say no armaments. I would say, I think, and I'm not going to swear on my heart about this, I would say when it comes to oil, it will be for investing in developing alternatives to oil. And some of the others I actually wouldn't know off the top of my head. So our policy is about being creating that balance. We have another fund manager called Saracen, if anybody's heard of them, and they are all ESG. So they're an activist investment house. And so half of our funds sit with Saracen. And so they're looking at the governance of an organization. They won't invest if there's no women on a board, for example. They look at wider issues like sugar. So for example, without naming names, Double Golden Arches, they wouldn't invest there. That kind of thing. So we've got one investment house whose primary motive is ESG. Now, let's be real though, they always do less well than CCLA, who are less totally ESG driven. So for us, our obligations, it's quite a difficult balancing act.
I ask because it's something we've been discussing with our board at SBS, and it's something that I think is really important, because if you're trying to undertake charitable endeavors, but actually you're investing your money in things that might have a high return, but actually might be counterproductive to what you're trying to achieve. It's a real sticking point, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's the argument that Saracen have over things like sugar, because obviously in this country, we have a massive health crisis, particularly around weight and diabetes, heart disease, that kind of thing. So they are really activist in that space. So yeah, but it is that, I've worked in fundraising for longer than I care to say. And there's always that thing about, should you take money from sources that feel uncomfortable because what you can do with it is really good? And, now there's so much debate about our shared British history and colonialism and slavery and all of that kind of thing. And actually, that's the reality of where a lot of that philanthropic money in the sector originally came from. So it's a really tricky, gnarly subject. I don't think there's any easy answers. And years ago, I was doing some research for another charity I worked for, and I met with Friends of the Earth. And actually, of all of the organizations I've ever spoken to, Friends of the Earth were the only ones who I felt like really had it right, because what they said is, we don't take money from companies. We just don't take money from companies, because you lift the lid on any business practice and there's going to be problems with it. And we can't take that risk. So they had a completely, in terms of the money that they would accept, completely, we won't do it because it's too risky. Yeah, it's an interesting one. And also the Charity Commission's guidance on it is pretty clear in terms of accepting money, much less clear, I think, on investment. But in accepting money, it's quite clear is that it can only be based on risk. And so it can't be that your trustees think it's terrible to invest, to accept tobacco money. It can't be based on their personal opinion. It is, what's the risk to the organisation for this? So, yeah.
Right, thanks.
That's a good one to talk about.
Shall we, I'll pass over to one of my colleagues who will read out your questions online.
Thanks, Rob. Just going to Joe, who's going to read out some questions there.
Hi, good morning. So we've got a couple of questions that are coming on the chat. So the first one is from, can you just move up to see which one, sorry. Emma Knowles of Two Saints. And she says, mention turnover less than $1 million. If you had an individual service within your company / charity that turns over less than $1 million, but the overall company turns over more than £1 million, would the individual service be eligible to apply under the company charity name, but as a standalone provision?
No.
That's a distinct answer.
Sorry for that. No, because if you, I mean, again, just remember that £1 million thing is not a hard and fast rule. But it's about your overall capacity to raise money. And we're trying to fund organizations whose overall capacity to raise money is less. And that £1 million thing is just a bit of shorthand for that. But, you know, we are literally funding organizations that turn over at times that turn over a couple of £1,000s a year. And we want to create this relatively equal playing field. We know it's not, but we want to create a relatively equal playing field. So if you're turning over well over £1 million, you've probably got 1 or 2 professional fundraisers. And we work with professional fundraisers in that under 100 million, but you have more capacity to raise funds.
Thank you. So we've got one from Megan Pitt of the Alder Trust. For the specific young people funds, what's the stance on funding statutory requirements, something like sex and relationship education?
We won't fund we will not fund statutorily required work. We can't. That's a rule for us because we're a registered charity. It can be quite blurry. And one of the sort of things that we tend to do, and it will depend on the funders, that we tend to say we won't fund work that happens within school hours. But then that's quite difficult if you're an organisation that's maybe working with young people who are out of education. So, you know, we try to be as responsive to that particular need as possible, but we cannot fund statutorily required work or statutory services. So we can't fund a school to educate. We can't fund a local authority for its statutorily required social housing or whatever the rule is, you know.
Cool. I've got 2 more. Tom Kitcher of Oasis Southampton. Will the funds you mentioned, funds you give, cover existing programs, or does it only cover new ones?
I'm so pleased to have that question because I can say yes. Woohoo! So yeah, we like innovation, but we also understand that funding good work really matters. So it doesn't have to be new work. We are still largely oriented towards funding projects, and we are as much as possible trying to loosen that, but it's not always that possible. But you don't have to come up with a new project. If you did it last year and it was successful, put it forward again.
Brilliant. Last one. Can you explain a little more about the disadvantage theme, please? What sort of things does this include?
It's a really good question. So when we think of disadvantage and inequality, so what we're trying to do is, you know, there is an issue with just looking at poverty, right? Because if we only looked at poverty, there would be many areas in the region that we would never fund. You know, you could argue that if you looked only at poverty, we would never fund in Winchester, but there's 2 homeless charities in Winchester, right? So the people who are homeless in Winchester are homeless in a really wealthy area. And that can be quite, you know, that can be more problematic than being homeless in an area where there's lots of services, right? So what we're trying to do with that kind of disadvantage and inequality is recognize that even if you're not in a poor area, you can still be living a really tough life. Now, if you look at your Equalities Act categories, well, those categories, you know, that might be the demographics that you're working with. And there is a lot of argument about supporting those groups, you know, people from non-white British backgrounds, LGBTQ, you know, that kind of thing. That's one way of looking at it, but it could also be, you know, if you're homeless on the streets of leafy Lymington, then there aren't really the support services in a place like that to support you. So it might be you could compare like for like, saying Southampton, where there's more homelessness, that actually there's support services in Southampton. So it's what we're trying to get to is to not. We're trying to show that we recognize that there's more to living a tough life than just being poor. Does that make sense? I'm not sure how well I've kind of argued that, but you know, you can be in, particularly in a rural county like this, and kind of a leafy, wealthy, largely in the rural areas. If you're living in one of those really gorgeous leafy towns, you know, in and around Petersfield, for example, but you're a care worker and you're looking after 2 kids and one of them's disabled and so on, well, you might be the only person in town who needs access to the food bank. So your life, in comparison to somebody living in the centre of town who can access the food bank really easily, might be comparatively harder. And I don't like making that comparison. It's not really real, but that's what we're trying to do, is recognise that in a county like this or a region like this, poverty isn't the only indicator to be thinking about. I hope it answers the question.
Thank you very much, and thanks for our questions at home.
Jackie, got a quick question. Do you fund salaries?
Yes, we do. I love the questions that I can answer yes to. Yeah, when we get the slides, you'll see we categorize expenditure in five ways. Core, I won't remember them. Core, volunteer, direct costs for the project, a couple of other things. We do explain quite clearly what each of those are, but we do fund salaries. But I would also say be a little bit careful. The salaries have to be justifiably part of the thing that you're applying for funding for. So you could apply for funding and say 10% of your chief exec's salary, or 10% of the project would cover chief exec. That's fine, that kind of thing, where you need a chief exec to be delivering the project. But we'd be worried if you put forward a project saying that you're going to work with 25 young people on financial inclusion and all of the salary was a chief exec salary, because they're probably not the ones doing the work. Do you see what I mean? So it has to be proportionate and related to the project, but we will fund those core costs. Oh, 2 more. Exciting. Got the room going now.
Do you accept legacies directly, or how do you encourage people to leave money to these things in their wills?
Excellent question, and I love it because I can again say yes. Absolutely, yeah. So we have quite a few endowment funds which are legacy funds, or a handful of endowment funds which are legacy funds. I would always encourage people to talk to us when they're will writing, so that how they word the requirements of the will are something that we can manage. And the reason I say that is, if you recall at the very beginning, I said, oh, you know, trusts, we take trust transfers. You don't need to worry too much about that. That's often why we're taking trust transfers, is that somebody in their will has set up a charitable trust on the advice of their solicitor, and that it's so tight and difficult criteria that it can't really be utilized. And so we end up taking them over, and then we can battle with the Charity Commission to make it broader criteria so that it can be managed. That's why I would always say, if somebody's writing a will and thinking about either a donation to a specific charity, where talk to that charity, or a will writing service, or to us, talk to us, so that we can ensure that it's best set up so it can be well utilized. Thank you for that question. Yeah.
Steve Collins, Maritime Volunteer Service. We're setting up a new unit in Southampton for the first time. And I saw in your presentation at the beginning, flashing up briefly, a young person steering a boat.
Yes.
So can you tell me about your connections with maritime boating industry?
Yep, absolutely. So the young person steering a boat, I think, would have been Wet Wheels, if you know Wet Wheels. So again, it always depends on the because of where we are, water-based activities, particularly opportunities for young people, and particularly opportunities for wheels. We do fund that as well. I would not say that we are particularly going out to find that. Although, for example, in our funding for the New Forest at the moment, one of the things we've required is that they're utilising the natural resources of the New Forest, which involves a long coast. But so we're not necessarily going out to do that, but it's that thing about wanting community groups to come to us with the stuff that works for their local community. There's always an issue, actually, though, it's worth mentioning with activities like that. And I can say it even if there is someone from Wet Wheels or similar organisations in the room, because I've been talking to lots of them about it. It's about depth of impact for that kind of work. And I used to be a trustee for Riding for the Disabled nationally, and we used to have this problem all the time where funders would say, well, you do this activity once or twice, but really, where's the change? And so that was always a difficult argument for us to have, and we got there with it. Those sorts of activities and things that put people onto the water or put them on a climbing wall or something like that once or twice actually is increasingly not going to be enough. That we want to see more depth of engagement, and part of that is time periods and numbers of time and that sort of thing. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much, Jackie. And I know you're going to be doing surgeries throughout the day with people as well. With
Surgeries, not surgery.
Yeah,
Not qualified for that.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, sorry. I'm going to suggest that we take a short 5-minute comfort break. And then hopefully our second speaker, Lucy Tennant, would have joined us from the National Lottery. Oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't know that was in there. Lucy's already with us. Okay, but I'm still going to suggest that we take a short comfort break and then we'll come back and Lucy's going to tell you about everything big National Lottery. Right. Thank you. Right. Excellent. Okay, so let's welcome our second speaker, Lucy from Big Lot. Here we go. Right.
Hello. Can you see me, hear me? Is everything good? Perfect. My name is Lucy Tennant. I'm from the National Lottery Community Fund. You may notice I'm not Andrew Chapman, who was supposed to be here, may have been working with previously. Sorry about that, but I'll do my best. Hopefully the presentation will appear as if by magic. I've really pared this down today. All the information that's on our kind of generic presentation is available on our website. So if you are in a position starting to look at applying or looking at funding, do take a really long look at our website or pick up a follow-up conversation if there's specific things about your project that you're not quite sure if they fit. If we have time and if you're interested, we can go into a lot more detail about some of the things that we're skimming over, but that's kind of where we're at today. So I thought I'd start with a really local lens. So we are part of the Solent and Surrey team. So you may know the National Lottery. We operate across all 4 countries in the UK, but with a really localised lens. So this is our Solent and Surrey team. There's actually 5 of us, but one of us is always off ill when we try and take a picture. So Andrew, the tour guy, is your Southampton local contact. This is his area here in the yellow, and he's the one that you would generally go to. He knows the city, he knows the surrounding area really well. The rest of us have different areas. So I usually look after Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight and kind of the surrounding areas there. If your project works across all the geographies, it's fine. We'll pick up a conversation with you. Sorry, this is my presentation, so it's not as relevant. Do you know vaguely where lottery funding comes from? Is that something that I need to tell you? So it's so with the sale of every lottery ticket, every £2 that is spent on a lottery ticket, I think it's about 56p goes to good causes. We as the community fund get the majority of that amount to distribute, and the other kind of lottery partners, so Heritage, Arts, Sports, BFI, they get a smaller amount to distribute as well. We are all completely separate organisations. We're trying to work a lot more collaboratively. But what that essentially means for you is you can apply to all funds and be eligible to get funding from all of those places and partners. So our funding in England, as I said, we are UK wide, but we are under the England Directorate. So this is what we're looking at the moment. I'll go into our kind of open funding streams in a bit, but oh, it's gone black. We have 3 priorities that sit across all of those funding streams. Let's see if I can remember them. So the main one kind of comes in the name. We are the community fund. Our main funding program is reaching communities. It is about bringing people together, creating communities, making connections across communities. That is quite vague, and I think that is quite deliberate because so many delivery mechanisms can bring people together. Still black. That's fine. We can carry on without the presentation if that's okay and send it out afterwards. The second one is places and spaces. So this can be viewed with quite an environmental lens. So it's about looking after the places and spaces that are important within your communities, but it could be other places and spaces that are important, a community centre, a building that brings people together, or increasingly online spaces that exist for the well-being of people. And the third one is it's helping people reach their potential at the earliest stage. So it's early intervention. Again, could be skewed to look at young people. How are you intervening at that early stage to reduce crisis points later in life, or help them be set up to kind of be more healthy in the future? But early intervention applies to many, many things. Physical health, mental health, what's being put in place at that early position to stop reaching crisis point. I wonder what the next slide was. So those are our funding priorities. I'll go straight into what our funding programs are. So at the moment, we have 3 main funding programs open. There's a small grants program called Awards for All. Currently, this is up to £10,000 for over 12 months. This is a relatively quick turnaround. So, well, relatively quick for the lottery. So you can get sort of money in your account within about 12 weeks. Which moves quite quickly. It's a one form on our website. There's no reporting required. And we have our slides back. Thank you, Drop the Mask. So Awards for All. What is changing? You may have heard this. We have a strategy renewal. Awards for All is doubling. So that is £20,000 for up to 2 years. We're not quite sure what that's going to look like in practice yet. Keep an eye on our website. It's coming out in the next few months. What it might mean for you is it's possibly worth waiting 2 or 3 months if you're looking for that smaller pot of funding, because all of a sudden that's multi-year and it's double the amount. Our larger funding programs are reaching communities and partnerships. So these are multi-year, over £10,000. There isn't an upper limit given, but we can talk about upper limits if you're in that position. And is really about supporting your organisation to do what your organisation does best. Ideally fitting with our, well, it has to fit with our funding priorities, apologies, which are quite open, to be honest. The reaching communities is for your organisation, and partnerships is if you and multiple others are working together to deliver something. For our partnerships funding stream, it's only if money is going to all of the organisations. You'll all be working in partnership in some way, but it's only really for that funding stream if it's about money changing hands. We have very recently launched our cost of living fund. So this is an emergency crisis response with funding from DCMS and funding put in from the lottery as well. And this is about if you're reaching those that are really impacted by cost of living. Again, because it's DCMS, it's quite tight in terms of what can be delivered, but also in terms of timescale. So you have to spend it by March 2024, but you can backdate it to April 2023. So it's a good project to apply for if you're reaching, for example, young people who need a safe space to come, kind of warm hubs, that kind of thing, or giving kind of debt or benefits advice. The process of I mean, this is the most important thing. If you take away anything from today, these are our priorities. In terms of the process of applying for funding, so Awards for All, like I said, one form on the website that goes through to a central team who will assess that, still based on these priorities. They don't have an upper limit, but at the in terms of your organisational turnover, but at the moment, because they're so oversubscribed, they are prioritising organisations with, I think, a turnover of, I'm not sure what it is, but it's a smaller turnover, maybe less than 500k a year, something like that. Reaching communities and partnerships, much longer process. I think a couple of people in the room have been through this. It's still through our website. If there's any accessibility issues, reach out to us. We can accept different formats if required, but it's through the website. You'll have 12 weeks, whereas a local team will be assessing that, looking at the information provided, looking at what else we're funding in the area, sort of geographically in terms of themes. And if that's the project idea, you know, it's quite stage one is quite limited on your how much information you can provide. So it's just getting an idea of if that can be taken forward. That goes through a decision panel. If you move forward, stage 2 is a lot more work. So that's when we'll be doing all the due diligence that Jackie mentioned, as well as asking for more detailed budget breakdowns, delivery plans, what your impact and your outcomes are going to be. Because this sets up, if you are successful, that ongoing relationship that we'll have with you over the few years that you're managing the grant. So we'll want to know what the impact is, because we'll be having that conversation with you. Have you reached this? Has this changed? That stage 2 can take probably 2 or 3 months. It really depends on where you're at as an organisation, how much you've been able to prepare beforehand. And then that goes to a final decision panel who ultimately make that call whether we can award it or not. Once that is awarded, we'll keep in touch, usually with annual or 6-monthly monitoring visits. And I think what we think is the kind of joy of being locally based teams. It would be Andrew in this case, but he would remain your contact throughout that application process and also as the grant goes live. So really getting to know your project and what's going on in the local area. I honestly can't remember what was on any other slides, so I wonder if it's more helpful to go straight out to questions. I mean, a lot of what Jackie said is really relevant. Oh, okay. Oh, they are there. Oh, sorry, keep flicking through. I just couldn't remember what was. Oh, okay. Let's see what else there is. If we go next slide. Yeah, so awards for all. We kind of talked through that. This is a little bit about what we can fund. So direct costs, core costs, organizational development is something, you know, if you want to take a kind of step up in terms of your organization, we can fund, I don't know, for example, a consultancy fees or something to develop your organization. Core fixed costs, we do fund capital, but it is very difficult and very complicated. So I think if you do have a capital project in mind, it's definitely worth picking up a kind of conversation with Andrew or myself if that's helpful. And actually I'll answer some of the questions that came up with Jackie. We do fund project costs if that's what's needed, but we can just fund, for example, we've got a couple of grants that just fund the chief exec's salary to get all of that work done. So and that can be for larger organizations or for smaller organizations. Had a really interesting conversation yesterday where we put it as you've got all your kind of work, your organization across the top, and you may have different projects that you deliver. Is lottery funding best suited to sit in one of those projects, so vertically, or actually is there a space across the top where we fund your office costs, keeping the light on? That's kind of the joy of lottery funding, is we can be flexible and we can really fund the boring side of what we do. It can be slightly more difficult to evidence the impact of that, but that's okay. You know, if your organization is doing impact measurement, you'll be able to show that anyway. Let's see what's on the next slide. Some eligibility. So we do fund all kind of charitable forms. We can also fund statutory organisations, but it's slightly more difficult because you have to show how it's separate from statutory organisation, like obligation and work. We can fund companies limited by guarantee, but we can't fund companies limited by shares. We've had a few people, you know, doing really good community work, but actually just the way they were set up is slightly wrong. So it's worth looking at kind of your organizational structure and if maybe a CIC is more suitable. To be honest, eligibility is the only reason that you would get immediately a no. The rest of it, if it's, you know, if we'll try and have a conversation with you to understand any information that might be missing. And actually a note on awards for all, because that's such a quick process, there isn't that kind of relationship base around it. The information you upload at the start point has to be correct. So your bank statement, as Jackie said, has to have the right address, the right name. And increasingly that's more difficult because online statements don't have all the information we need. So you'll have to make sure you've got an up-to-date letter from your bank. See what comes next. So this is the process we kind of spoke about. I don't think there's much more to add on this, but again, just to reiterate, if writing loads of information is not something that your organization is in a position to do, we can accept video applications at stage 1. And we've had an organization led by people with disabilities who could not read or write. So we did all of that by meetings, typing up their conversations to try and make it as accessible as possible. Is there anything else? yeah, that's how to apply, what to expect from the application form. Small tip, as you all know, probably from any applications, our website does not automatically save, and you can lose what you've put on there, put it all on a Word document, copy and paste it later. Yeah, lots of nods in the room here. And I think I'll open to questions. I will really quickly say we have a strategy renewal coming out, as I kind of touched on. There are some changes coming. I don't know what they are. We have 4 new priorities, but they're not a huge movement from where we're at currently. If you want me to go into more detail, I definitely can, but that's not coming in until summer next year. So actually, if you're looking at applying around this time, just stick with those 3 priorities that were on the screen for a long time.
Hi, it's Dave Shields again. In terms of organisations that you're unable to fund, you mentioned companies and sole traders. Within the wider cooperative, whether it's a workers' cooperative, community benefit organisation, mutuals, I just wondered whether they could qualify and under what circumstances they would be eligible perhaps to apply, because it strikes me that often they're doing something for social good, and any surpluses that might be generated are ploughed back in for the good of society rather than to line their own back pockets. So I just wondered to what extent you're able to support groups that with those ambitions.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe the answer is yes to all of those that you mentioned. I don't know the specific kind of legalities of those forms, but I know that we funded, for example, a housing association who were registered under, I think, the mutual benefits. So we definitely can and do fund. We'd need to check they have sort of asset locks in place to make sure that money is not going to shareholders or stakeholders, but is going back in. So yes, our system might not immediately accept it, but if you're coming in for a large pot of funding, that conversation will take place, and we should be able to work it out.
Yeah, Joe, so links. I've got 2 quick questions.
Okay.
Question 1: can the funding fund an existing project that might be coming to the end of its existing monies?
Yes, definitely. That to be honest, that puts you in a new project. An existing project puts you in a good position to look at our funding, because you may have 12-18 months of evidence of how that works and the impact of excuse me, that project has had on your community. So when you come to applying for extra funding for it, you can say, here's our evidence base, with your funding we will do that and potentially more, or just keep doing exactly what's doing because it's having such a big impact.
Cool.
So yes, definitely.
Brilliant. And quite a specific one, the funding that forgive me if I remember the name, the smaller pots, could they be used, for example, for sort of running costs for warm spaces and things in the city, you know, buying food, drinks, paying for energy and so forth?
Yes, I believe so. Awards for All is the smaller funding pot. Yes, that can go towards core costs. It's in terms of their processing, it's easier to frame it as a project and just say, you know, this is what our organisation does and this is what this funding will be used for, which is resources and heating and again, staff costs can all go inside that. If there's something specific you're doing there, cost of living fund might be a really good one. They're giving up to 75k, so to support that, exactly that kind of thing. So worth looking at.
Can I say, first of all, having just been through this process, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much. As a funder, you were brilliant. The support we got was amazing. The only question I have is around that first stage of how much, because it was a bit confusing. We basically wrote an entire draft proposal for the first stage and then went, we don't need half of this information. But because, and I'm sure a lot of organizers are saying that initial point is, that's what we need to get through in order to be able to sustain a proper funding bid. And from your perspective, you don't want to be sat reading, you know, an 800-page document around, you know, a proposal. What's your advice on what to put in that initial stage piece?
Yeah, so I suppose through the website, there is a word limit. So that kind of limits what you put in anyway. So it's really about, I kind of compare it to when you're preparing for a job interview or tailoring your CV. Really look at our priorities, make sure you're hitting at least one of those. It doesn't have to be all 3. Focus on that, on the links with our priorities, and really just show off about who you are and what you're doing. Mention any specialist skills that your staff or your board might have. all the impacts that you have and you can measure. What some people do is put in kind of quotes or kind of testimonials. That can be helpful, but I would say because of the word limit, it can be more beneficial to say, actually, rather than what this one person thinks, we've spoken to 50 people and 48 of them said it was a great project. So it's really about just highlighting kind of the good stuff that you're doing, and also spell out, I think, who you are and what you're doing. Because actually, for example, with Saints for Sport, we've had an existing relationship. So actually your application would have been looked at alongside previous grants. If it's brand new, really spell out what your organisation does and what you would do with this funding. And especially if it's something quite specialist, it can seem quite obvious to you, but it might not be to us. We try and understand all of our projects, but the charity and voluntary sector spans quite a variety of things, so we can't be experts in all of them. So yeah, spell it out, show off, and be as kind of specific as you can. If you have at that point of applying, we know we're going to run 3 sessions a week, this number of people, and this is what they're going to say has come out of it. Really go into that kind of micro detail, who you're working with. Sorry, I'm now just listing everything that's helpful to see, who you're working with, how embedded you are. Yeah, is that vague enough?
I think we've got some questions online. So we've got one from Emma at Two Saints, and she asks, same question as before. I may have missed that being spoken about. Would the National Lottery fund, as for my first question, an overall charity has a turnover of £1 million, but an individual service in need of funding within that does not turn over near £1 million?
Yep. So the kind of threshold I mentioned earlier was specifically for Awards for All, so the smaller grant funding programme. That's the only one where they really look at an organisation's turnover. All in terms of reaching communities and partnerships, so that larger multi-year funding, we don't have a threshold on turnover at all. So we have some organisations that are really large charities but delivering very localised projects. So yes, that would be fine for our funding. And that could be, again, for someone like Two Saints, who are, to my understanding, quite a big organisation in the area, that would be about understanding, is it a project that's needed, or is it some of that overarching costs, and how that fits with your organisational strategy and kind of plans.
Cool. We've got one more from Ellie, who says, what will your funding priorities be for 2024?
Cool. So again, we, like some funders, we don't have priorities such as this year we're funding environment, this year we're funding children and young people. It's all about those 3 that are at the moment. When the strategy renewal kicks in, let's see if I can remember the 4 priorities. So there's still the community focus, so bringing people together. Environment is a theme, so that could be specifically environmental projects. It could be funding to help your organisation to be greener. Children and young people will more explicitly be a focus. So yeah, again, that does tie in with what we're doing now. And the 4th one is healthy communities. So that's physical health, mental health, interventions to make people live kind of longer, healthier lives. As you can see, really not a stretch from what we're doing currently. It is just slightly more explicit about those 4 kind of themes.
Yeah, hi there. I've got a couple of questions. Greg from Drop the Mask Productions. One of them is when people go through the process and they don't get the funding, I think a lot of groups become disheartened, but each project is looked at individually. It's not based on failure or acceptance of a project. So for me, I think the question is, people don't need to get disheartened. They should learn from that. You do go through that process, don't you, of what could be done maybe in a different way?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we aim to do, is to try and say no, but, or not now. So no, but this is our feedback from the panel, or this is why it didn't quite fit with our priorities. Or yeah, especially if you've been through kind of both stages and had that longer term kind of conversation and relationship with us, we'll really try and give you as detailed feedback as possible. And it's never easy to hear no, and not everyone's going to be happy about it, and that's completely understandable. But we also do get people that have said going through this process has helped us get our ducks in order and kind of reassess our priorities. So that is something that we really kind of hope to do. And yes, if you get a no, you can reapply the next day. There's not, we don't have any restrictions on that. You can apply. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can apply for everything all at once and apply for multiple Reaching Communities grants at the same time. We don't have restrictions on that. So yes.
Thank you very much.
This is a rather David Hutchings, Friends of Riverside Park. We have a very short stretch of unadopted road. Short, very short. If we could get some funding to have that improved, which would help disabled people and the whole of the community, and then it was become adopted by the local authority because they would want it to be perfect before they take it on. Would that be something that could be thought of?
That is specific, not one I've come across before. In terms of what you're saying, if it's managed by a sort of registered charity or it would be an eligible project, it would fit with the environmental theme. And if you can, I think what would be more difficult is evidencing the impact of that stretch on kind of the local community. Because for a large pot of funding, we tend to ask for that community consultation. And actually, do you have the evidence of speaking to people using that space and how they want it improved? Yeah. So in which case that definitely could happen. I think there would be potentially questions about once you've done it and then it goes to the local authority. Actually, should the local authority be taking ownership of it currently and putting in the funds to kind of rejuvenate it? So the answer is yes, it would be feasible. Depending on costings, a waterfall might be more straightforward, just because it's a much quicker process. And if you can find some match funding to make sure you can kind of get it done, that would be stronger. But yeah, interesting.
Hi, Sam, SVS. Just thinking about groups where perhaps English isn't their first language and difficulties in filling forms in and completing that. What help is there for those kind of groups?
Yeah, great question. We do try and be as flexible as possible, so we can accept a video application. So literally someone talking to camera and answering those questions. We've had a couple like that. We do have access to interpreters. It's not something I've seen done, but I know that it's something that we will do if it's required. So I believe we can kind of fund that to come in and have that conversation or support with the application process. Or as the example I gave with the disabled organisation, we can do it all face to face. And if they're happy for their words to be written by us, either through an interpreter or kind of through the English and the understanding that they currently have, we'll aim to do that. I guess the other thing about that is our staff time and capacity. And so we are not currently set up to be a funder that can trying to find a better phrase than handhold, but provide that dedicated level of support for all of our applicants and grant holders. But if there is a project that is really meeting a need and they just have no access to this kind of application process, we will really do what we can to kind of come and meet with them in their space.
Just a quick question around waiting on funding applications. Yeah. As an organisation who's already received funding, I don't know if you can answer this honestly or not. Is there any waiting? Because obviously we have a really diverse portfolio of work and we've received funding for one area of work. If we were to put an application in, is there any thought process behind that application that says we've already awarded that organisation some money, no matter how worthy the other application is?
Yeah.
Is there any waiting on it, or is it just
I was thinking of waiting, not waiting.
Yeah.
Waiting. So again, no, nothing official, no hard lines on this. We have examples of organisations that have held multiple reaching communities grants for different projects, different areas of their work. Specifically in Hampshire and actually specifically in Southampton, we're really trying to move away from that happening because it's quite a lot more work for you. You've got 2 grants to manage, 2 reporting schedules, 2 kind of sets of finances to account for. And actually in terms of the diversity of our portfolio, we want to make sure we're reaching as many communities and as many groups as possible. So you can definitely apply. It wouldn't impact your eligibility, but your current level of funding from us would be looked at alongside all the information that you've provided. It's not to say, you've got a 20% less chance of being successful, but if you can say, we are literally the only people in the city or in the area doing this piece of work and our current funding is ending and there is no one else to go to, it would be remiss of us not to look at that as a standalone project. If you are looking at something like that, what we're trying to do with organisations that hold multiple grants is have them end at the same time. So then if you're looking at continuation funding, actually you can apply for the same two projects together, just to decrease us having those kind of multiple grants from one organisation. Yeah, eligibility is fine.
Because you've got the upper limit of that 500k before you move from one funding pot to another. And if you have two applications, are they combined, or is it, or are they seen as separate funding areas which wouldn't take you over that threshold, which is a very different ballgame for funders?
Yes. So just to elaborate, like I said, we don't have an upper limit on what you can apply for. We say apply for what you need. I'm talked through the two-stage process. If the application is over £500,000, doesn't matter over how many years, that has to go to a third panel called England Committee, which takes 2 or 3 more months and has a slightly higher level of scrutiny. We can do that, and we don't want to discourage organisations from doing that. But in terms of your timescales and your kind of capacity, that's the 500k limit. They would not be combined. They would sit separately, so you wouldn't automatically go to England Committee. We'd probably just make them aware, but I don't think it would be a decision point. So it wouldn't extend the application process. I think Nina had a question first.
Thank you. Mine's following on from that, actually very similar. So we've got reaching communities from you, which is fabulous, and just to echo what you were saying, so helpful. It was really, really good. But we're wanting to move into Havant, as I was, thanks to HIWCF for getting us there in the first place, and we've now got our first bit of Hampshire County Council funding for Havant. If we wanted to put in another application specifically around Havant, which is different funding officer, you rather than Andrew, how does that, is that okay? How does that work? And it's very much project based, whereas the reaching communities is core costs for us. So where do we stand?
So yes, again, it's a very similar answer. You'd be eligible, you can do that. The new application, even though, like you say, it's in a different space and would potentially sit quite separately as a project, the existing grant and the history with the fund would be looked at alongside that kind of assessment process. What would be, well, 2 things on that specific example. Moving from Southampton to Havant, we'd really want to understand how embedded you are, because actually what we can see is larger organisations, we call it parachuting in and saying, well, we've delivered this in one area and it'll definitely work here. So actually, what are the connections that you've made locally? I know that's not quite the question you're asking, but I think it's really relevant to say, why is it you that's got to kind of deliver this? Who are you working with? What are the conversations with people on the ground and potential service users? And another kind of arm of that is your sustainability as an organisation and your dependence on the fund. So often for organisations, similar, we would love to support grassroots organisations to grow and develop, but then actually once their 3-5-year funding is over, have we grown an organisation from a 20k to 100k turnover, and then that funding stops? What happens after that? So actually, if this is quite specific, but we've supported you to grow and become more sustainable, and you've got other funding coming in, if that's also happening in Havant, where is that sustainability plan, both for that project and also for your organisation overall? So those are the things that, actually jumping back to that question about what to put in the stage 1, if it's quite a specific project like this, it's worth addressing. We already have reaching communities funding. This is how it sits separately. This is our sustainability plan. But this is why we need this particular pot of funding. Does that make some kind of sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
A couple of quick questions from me, Lucy. So same as I asked Jackie earlier, how are we doing in Southampton on getting our slice of the pie? Because I know that some years back, probably 7 or 8 years back, Southampton was doing quite poorly on pulling money in, and we put quite a lot of work in with the lottery at that point in time. We managed to turn that situation around, but I'm quite curious how that's looking currently.
I actually text Andrew to say, do you have any figures? Because I'm not managing this area, I don't know the specifics. Probably the time you're talking about 7-8 years ago, all decisions were made centrally. So people in Birmingham and Newcastle were making decisions on any application that came in, which meant Hampshire in general got a much lower slice of the pie. Surrey got basically nothing, which is the other area that we support. So there's definitely been a shift since we've moved into the areas and since we've got people that understand the local communities that we're working in. Within Hampshire and Surrey, Southampton is the highest has the largest number of grants, has the largest amount of funding within the area. I can definitely find out for you. I can get my laptop out, and if that's of interest, I can look at sort of the number of active grants in the city, and kind of the amount and kind of the proportions. I think same again, Southampton, Portsmouth, Isle of Wight, always the ones that are oversubscribed and in some cases overfunded. Yes, Southampton, if you look at indices of multiple deprivation, if you look kind of levelling up stats, that's always going to be a priority in terms of poverty and disadvantage, but we also need to make sure an equitable split of our funding. So there is an attempt to be slightly more strategic and make sure that we are really supporting the city in the best way that we can. That's not just working with, probably 40 or 50 different organisations, but actually what's our role within the city.
If you are able to provide the information about number of grant holders, that would be really useful for me from a CVS context when I'm working in partnership with our local authority and NHS. For me to be able to have that data would be really invaluable. And leading on from that, my second question was around where's the lottery sitting at the moment in terms of funding infrastructure, so kind of tier 2 support to the voluntary sector as provided by Council of Voluntary Services.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. I'm sorry. In terms of where our funding is coming from or where it's going?
In terms of where it's going. So at SBS, the majority of our work is around supporting the local sector, bringing doing things like today, supporting people in their funding, all of that, volunteering, all of that kind of stuff. So how is the lottery viewing funding those sorts of activities?
Oh, I see. At the moment, pretty keen in terms of supporting CVS organisations themselves to support the sector. Actually, again, that's kind of a strategic look. Is there a different way that we can put funding into an area that's not just funding 40 or 50 organisations? What we saw, especially post-pandemic, is CVS organisations or infrastructure bodies starting to do project delivery and then coming into us for funding. In some areas, they're the only ones doing it, they're filling a gap, then they'd look to hand it back to the voluntary sector. There's a lot of conversation at the moment. Is that the right thing for us to do with our funding? Actually, are we better supporting the sector? So actually, yes, we generally prefer to fund core costs or sector support over delivering specific projects. But if you're the only one doing it, then that's where
I mean, strategically, we've moved away from public service delivery. Whereas, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we had a plethora of different projects to the public. Myself and the board have, made quite a conscious decision to move away from that because we feel that the sector in Southampton has matured to a point whereby there are people that are much better placed to be delivering some of that direct work to the public. And we see our role very much more as one of an infrastructure body, of kind of bringing together networks, representation, all of those kind of core CVS infrastructure functions, and that's where our focus is. So be interested to talk to you a bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that'd be a really interesting conversation because I think, different areas work differently. Am I right? And some are contracted from local authority, some are completely independent. So again, there's that statutory conversation. What are you funded to do, and what can our funding build on rather than kind of replace? So yes.
Right. Thanks very much. Any other questions?
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. Thanks very much, Lucy. Oh, thanks very much, Lucy. So you're going to both provide the slides, and I'll send those round to everyone hopefully this afternoon, so that everyone can have those. So we've got 15 minutes left. What might be quite useful is if we could do a bit of an information share. So if people online could put into the chat any particular information that they'd like to share with the group, that would be really useful. And I will go around the room and see if there's any particular information that people would like to share. So let's start off with Nina.
Yeah, I think we're just business as usual. Really, we're running. I'm from Safe New Futures.
If you can introduce yourselves.
Yes, I'm Nina. Try this one.
Give that to Rob. So you've got
Give that to
oh,
Rob.
sorry.
All right, there we go.
Thanks.
Right. I'm Nina Kelly. I'm CEO of Safe New Futures, and we run online training programs, cognitive behavioral therapy based, moving people from a place of not being in training, education, or employment much closer to being into employment or training, or actually 50% into employment as well. So we operate all around Hampshire, Isle of Wight, and online programs for young people and adults. We run them every 6 weeks, and we've just developed a 12-week pathways program, not the positive pathways that Community First run, our own pathways program, to give the extra support that's needed, which we've discovered post-pandemic. There's a lot more mental health issues going on with people. So that's new. And what else is new is a face-to-face program that we're running in Havant, and that's starting beginning of September. But yeah, so it's just business as usual for us, really.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nina. And if we can move on round.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Rob. I'm a Dad's Club coordinator, which is I've just started the new role. That's with the Parenting Network, which is also new to Southampton, working with the family hubs, what were Sure Start centres, and that will be launching starting in September. So there'll be more to talk about what that actually is and what we're doing. But it's dads and their families sort of focused, certainly initially, and that's my role.
Fantastic. Well, I'll tell you more about it, Rob. Brilliant. Sarah?
Hello, I'm Sarah. I work for the Natural Environment team within Southampton City Council. My role is community campaigns. I mostly work with volunteer groups in our parks and open spaces, and with people on probation, but we're also interested in reaching out into the community more and sort of exploring how we can maybe reach people that are maybe not directly adjacent to a good local green space, how we can sort of get them to use the green spaces more and sort of enhance on our equality and leveling out those sort of inequalities as well. And I had a few ideas walking here. But it's been really interesting just to listen to how to approach grant funding as well, because that's not something I have really done much of before, but it's good to sort of get your head around that earlier on. So thank you.
Fantastic. And Sarah, are you connected with our green network at SBS?
Yes, I have missed
Perfect.
the last one because I seem to have dropped off some sort of email list, but yes, definitely the green network, awesome stuff there to advertise anything that you're doing environmentally as well, and I'm involved in that.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Steve Collins, head of unit of the Southampton Maritime Volunteer Service based at Shamrock Quay. We've got funding already, and we've got a safety boat that we're putting on the water. And our main focus, at the request of the harbour master, is to do harbour patrols on the River Itchen, passing your area, very much so, and having a presence, because the harbour master vessels are too large to get up under Northern Bridge. But we're all about boat skills and training, and we've got contacts with shipping industry throughout Southampton, massive industry. We've got contacts with shipping companies, and what I've taken from today is to focus on training under 25s. We'd love to do that and give them commercial boat handling skills and help them get into employability, help them get into jobs in the industry. Kathy is my wife here. We're in the process of moving down to Southampton, looking after a house in Shirley near where our daughter lives, who works for Carnival UK. And so employability and getting young people into the industry is, and also very much in the Southampton area, around Southampton SO14, as we talked about with the Saints contact. So that's where we are.
Excellent.
Oh, Kathy.
Yeah. And just to add, we've been running MVS in Kingston on Thames, and one of the very useful side sort of aspects of it is loneliness and involvement, particularly if males, older men who have maybe retired or coming up to retirement, and they really enjoy being involved on the river, getting out on the river and getting involved, and it's a nice loneliness thing.
Fantastic.
David Hutchings. I'm the currently chairman of Southampton and District Transport Heritage Trust, which is a bus preservation charity. We don't fall into the funding streams that have been mentioned at all. And we know our friends at Portsmouth have been turned down twice by Heritage Lottery. But I'm perhaps more interesting for you. I'm the secretary of the Friends of Riverside Park. So we struggling to help and use my English better. We are a support group for the Southampton people to help the park improve under the restrictions of the local authority and what we can do and what we can't. That's why I asked you about the private road, because that private road is a blockage. It's a safety hazard with indiscriminate parking. And because it's not controlled by the Southampton City Council, they can't double line it. And that is why we're trying to get it regularised.
Where's that road?
It's off Manor Farm Road it leads directly into the park. Yes.
What next to the social club?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well, it's got lots of wooden boulders on it.
No.
Sorry, just a reminder there to talk into the microphones. Thank you.
Okay, apparently it's the one right by the ice cream van, and I live right opposite, so I know where it is. That's good. A couple of things. So Paul from Saints Foundation. I want to talk about our bench project, which is going to go live fairly soon. Really excited about this. It's in partnership with ourselves, SVS, Friends of St James's Park, Southampton University. This all came about off the back of a partnership innovations workshop that Southampton University ran, and there was a Dragon's Den style presentation. We had like 10 minutes to come up with an idea. So Joe is in the room. Yep, Joe is instrumental in this as well. So we've got, the idea is we're going to produce some conversation benches. So they will be placed in 3 locations in the city. David, I want to talk to you about one of these because it'd be really nice to have possibly one at the park. So they're going to be branded with red and white stripes because I can, so that's why I've done it. But the idea is that these will be designated spaces. We're going to get some advertising out to communities around. This is a space that if you sit here, somebody will come and talk to you. You feel comfortable to have a conversation in this space. And then the plan is we want to expand those out and have more of them. So that's a really exciting project. It's a really small amount of funding, so we're not going to go big with it, but I always think bigger than that. So I think we will. And the other thing is around our Saints by Your Side men's mental health support program, which is starting a new cohort on that. There's an online form on the Saints Foundation website. It's a self-referral or a partnership referral into that, and it's a program to support men aged 18 to 60 to work through their mental health issues, and we're looking for more people to get involved in that. And the gentleman in front of me from Dad's Club, who I can't remember, I want to have a quick chat with you when we're done. So I think we have been in touch through one of our staff. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Gregory White, founder of Drop the Mask IT and Media. We're a CIC, community interest company. I think we're the only one that is a social profit IT and media that we found, especially in Hampshire, surrounding counties. But what we do, we really concentrate on a lot of neurodiverse, not just people, but ways of thinking. And what we try to do is make IT and media, we try to lower the barriers. We try and make it inclusive as possible. So when we work on anything to do with IT and media, we try and include the people that we're trying to do it for, get them involved in conversations. So we try to take away that fear to bring people's sort of like confidence into it. We concentrate an awful lot on young people and trying to take away the fear for them. I'm neurodiverse, and I like to try to say to other neurodiverse people, it's okay to be who you are, and we try to create a low hierarchy environment. We're working on a lot of partnerships at the moment with SVS, So Linked, and so many more NHS trusts, 6 or 7 at the moment. And it literally is not empowering us; it's empowering others to give technologies that are non-coding, to take away the myth of AI and stuff that people think complicated. So we're developing a community room upstairs as well, green screen, AR and virtual reality. And we're trying to get grants around to empower people to see about employability. They don't need literally like formal education to be employed. We take a person for what they are as a whole and don't try to change them. It sounds a bit hairy-fairy to a lot of people, but we believe the strength is in individuals and letting individuals be who are, they're understanding what they are. We have loads of fun with IT and media like we're doing today, but it's to empower people to perhaps that never want to come to a meet, they can't come out, that they can stay anonymous or join meetings too. So our focus is not on how good it looks, it's the inclusivity it creates. I talk loads, I'll shut up at that. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Greg.
Hi, just a quick message from me. I'm Sam Gould, Community Development Worker at SoLinked. Over the last maybe 3 or 4 months, we've been thinking about grant funding and how to support groups in the city around grant applications and securing grants. We've had a couple of meetings with groups about this. One thing that's come out of it is a Facebook group called Southampton Grant and Info Share. And that's a place where you can join and ask any questions around grants, or if you have any information around grants that you want to share, you can put it on the group, and that's what we do as well. So do join the group. We've probably got about 70 members, but if you want to join, just do.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sam.
Hi, good morning, Joe So Linked. It's amazing how your mind goes blank when a room full of people looks at you, and virtually as well. So things going well here at SoLinked, and as Sam's saying, the work that he and Alex have been doing is great, and Julie, our dementia friendly coordinator as well. As Paul mentioned, we've been working on the bench project, which is going well. We're looking forward to getting that out into the world. We're also looking at what the winter's going to hold and starting to open up the conversation around warm spaces that our navigation team at our navigation partners at Spectrum can start sort of supporting people to access. And a group of us are going to sort of be looking at what the warm space offer in the city could be going forward. So if you're interested in linking up at that, please give me a shout. Rob, we had some comments and some updates on things, so if it's okay, I'll update.
Yeah. If we let's have the updates from people, from our friends that are online. Thanks.
Cool, thanks. So update number 1 is from Liz Batten of SOCAN. Hi everyone, please take a look at our Southampton Sustainability Directory, which is in the chat, www.sotoncan.org.uk when you are able. Please contact us via our website or via our email, sotoncan@gmail.com, if you'd like to add your organisation or group to the directory. We've now got another one from Hilary at Safe New Futures. Safe New Futures has places available on our youth course at 16 to 25 years, starting the 5th of September. The course is free, runs online Tuesdays and Wednesdays for 5 weeks, and supports participants in developing their confidence and self-esteem, address unhelpful thinking patterns, and rediscover their skills and strengths, enabling them to take positive steps forward. For more information, go to the website www.safe.org.uk or contact office@safe.org.uk. These are on our chat, so if you want to take these informations down. Danielle, I know someone just saying bye. Emma Knowles from Two Saints. Emma Knowles from Two Saints says, Two Saints Day Centre are opening supported self-catering project at our day centre for homeless clients. This is to upskill clients, regain confidence and dignity, increase budgeting skills. We are looking for kitchen volunteers, general service volunteers, as this is a really exciting time to teach or relearn skills lost to our clients. So where am I? Thank you. Volunteers to get into this sector after a period of not working, or those with lived experience. It would also help clients to make food / budgeting a priority, etc. Overall, it will assist in reducing our overspend on food provisions, especially during the cost of living crisis. We are also very keen to connect to any projects, companies, cafes who can donate shelf-stable food provisions to support our clients. Clients will be supported to budget, buy food, batch cook, etc. But donations always welcome. My email is emma.knowles@twosaints.org.uk. If anyone wants to get in touch, please do. Thanks. Cool. We've got a reminder here from our volunteer at Solink, Julie. Just a reminder, if you'd like to promote your events or courses on Solid, please email Julie at solinked@southamptonvs.org.uk. We've got an update from Katie at Mast. Katie says, Mast Mayflower Studios are recruiting artists to get involved in our upcoming visual arts project, which are run as engagement projects for the community groups and schools. Full details can be found here at the Mayflower website /
We'll share the chat with everyone.
After,
let's
yeah.
have the links, yeah.
Cool. If anyone knows of any artists who might be interested, then please encourage them to get in touch with us. And then Megan from Alder Trust, pardon me, an umbrella organisation focused on mental health wellbeing. We run a couple of projects in Southampton, the Fairgrove Centre offering counselling to those experiencing baby loss and infertility, Aldermore Community Farm, nurturing people and land together, focusing on permaculture and sustainability. 3 healthy relationships, extension work of the Fairgrove Centre, empowering young people in their relationships with the aim to reduce domestic violence. Last one, Bev Pearce, everyone. Hi, I'm Bev Pearce from Friends of Portsmouth Rec. We are a community group that work with Southampton City Council to improve Portswood Rec, pardon me. We desperately need grant funding to replace play equipment as the rec has around 20%. The rec has already had 20% has been removed for health and safety reasons, and the rest is also beginning to fail. Any pointers, help, advice, please let me know. And Bev's emails in the chat. Recently been rejected at first stage of lottery reaching communities funding though. Okay. That is everyone, Rob.
Excellent. Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So we've gone over, oh no, only by about a minute, but just to say thanks ever so much for everyone who's come along into the room today. Really nice to see people in the flesh, so to speak. Thanks ever so much to the people that have come online. Sorry, you're waving something at me. Perfect. What Joe's going to do in a minute is give you all a small piece of paper, and if the people that are in the room, and if you could just let us know your thoughts about today and how it's been, that would be really useful. Right, other thanks to our 2 speakers, Lucy and Jackie. Thanks ever so much for coming along. Hopefully you'll receive a flurry of very high quality applications in the coming weeks. Thanks to Sam for helping organise, and massive thanks to Drop the Mask for supporting this event today with their tech expertise. Amazing. Just to say to those online, I will, or for everybody actually, I will email this afternoon with the slides, with the chat, and also for the people who are online, a small link to a form whereby you could similarly give us a little bit of feedback about how today has been for you, any improvements, any observations you have at all are really welcomed. Right, so on that note, thanks ever so much everybody, and hope you all have a lovely weekend. Thanks.